Let's go.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader. Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. It's David Horsager. I am joined today by a very special friend, a brilliant human being. He is CEO of the Summit Group. He's been an advisor for companies across 45 countries. He's worked with everything from Cisco to 3M to General Mills. He served on several boards of directors. He was co-author on Relevance, Matter More. But this is how I have to open. Phil, you have impacted my life significantly. And for those that don't know, 30 years ago, you were a mentor of mine in a youth program in college, about 30 years ago. And the National Youth Leaders Foundation?
I think it was a National Student Leadership, David.
Yeah. And we went to DC together, and now we've done more together. But I am really looking forward to this. This is, so anyway, welcome to the show, Phil.
Thank you.
Phil Styrlund.
Thank you. And by the way, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've done with your life and your work, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I deeply am proud of you, my friend. So it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So let's just, give any background on you, even personal, just a quick background. So what is it we need to know about Phil that we don't know?
I think the main thing is I'm a deeply curious guy. You know me well enough to know that those intros, that's a facade. My mission in life is to be more deeply confused about more important things. And I don't mean that in a flippant way. The older I get, and we talked about this recently, David, is I'm not interested in being right anymore. What I'm interested in is really wrestling with the big stuff. And I've just lived a life of curiosity. I would describe myself as a guy who's kind of stumbled forward. I've learned from my mistakes because I've made a lot of them. But I'm a blessed guy. I've been married for over 40 years to my best friend. I have two wonderful daughters that work for my company. I traveled the world before COVID and hope to get back on the road. But I tell you what, I'm a blessed guy, and I'm based here in Minnesota, and I can't wait to get back on an airplane.
All right. Well, you can join me this week if you'd like. So it's coming. It's interesting. It's very interesting that way. Like I was last week, 5 flights, 4 cities or whatever. And in certain parts, it's wide open. In certain parts that I'm canceling, postponing, changing. So it's just an interesting take. We kind of have to be ready for change. I call this, this kind of anticipation. We have to be ready for a shift all the time. It's not just this think out strategically and pivot. It's like I need to plan the possible pivots ahead.
Exactly. And a big revelation for me is just I didn't realize that I was jet lagged for 40 years. And I mean that with all sincerity. Until I've been on the ground for a year, I didn't realize how my circadian clock was, shall we say, a bit out of alignment. And so that's been one of the gifts of COVID, is to be on the ground.
Well, we're going to get into some key things, but let's just talk about this for a second, because I've looked up to you. I've seen you making a huge impact. I've seen you grow a successful company in a way that makes an impact in real lives and real leaders. I've seen this humility. But I remember you saying a couple things. One, the greatest ministry you can give to is business and leadership, and there's a lot of people that are lonely at the top and all these kind of things. But I also saw you seeking to lead your family well in the midst of being gone quite a bit, and but you always said, I want to fly more, and yet you come back and say, I needed a break. Tell me about that.
Well, I think both are true. I still want to travel, just more purposely and less. And what we did is one of our design themes, because we're going to talk about having design themes for life with our kids, was to show them the world. And now they often say that that was more value than a college education, to be honest, was to really travel the world and see that there are many ways to live life and to be comfortable with difference. So part of how we kind of balanced those was to bring the kids along. And to any young parents out there, I can't overstate this. Choose experiences over things. Be careful of debt. You don't need stuff. What do they say? Don't spend money you don't have to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't know. You don't need stuff. Experiences are what changes your life. And I passionately say, buy less stuff and invest in more experiences, and your life will be exponentially richer. Now, the flip side of that, David, and you and I talked about it in all honesty. One of the learnings of life is, in fact, there was a book. Now, listen to the title of this book. It's called Healing, Healing, Healing the Call of Your Life, not heeding. But what the book wisely delved into is that often the greatest adversities, the greatest wounds in our life come from following the call of our life. I feel very called to do what I'm doing because I believe I'm impacting people. I believe you are too. But what happens sometimes is on the backside of that call is woundedness. And for me, it was overwork, sometimes over traveling, and just literally exhausting myself. And one of the ironies was I worked so hard to be a hero to strangers. I'd just like you fly halfway around the world, to do a keynote to people I don't even know, but often was a stranger to my heroes, which are my family.
Right.
So I'm not going to tell you I got it all right. Believe me, I didn't.
I talk about that a lot, in our world of traveling. It's like a lot of people in our space, at least, they're most loved, revered, and admired by people that don't know them at all, the furthest away, the audience, and they're not loved by those closest to them at home. And right. You and I want to be a hero at home. So,
applause at home.
Right, exactly. So one thing about you, Phil, is you keep learning. And, you've got a couple master's degrees, you've done all these things, you're still running this company, but you're back at it getting your PhD. What are you learning these days?
Well, my goal is to continue to run my company, the Summit Group, but also to teach in university. I mean, that's really, I want to finish well, and that's where I want to do that. Because I think what I see in higher ed is we're installing knowledge, but not wisdom. And so it's interesting, David, in the last 2 years, back to stumbling forward in life, I've stumbled on probably the most, one of the most significant topics that I've always known, and it was standing right in front of me. And what it is character science. And so it begins with a simple thesis. Who you are matters more than what you do. Now, I've known that my whole life, but I've never been able to articulate that single sentence. And that single sentence captures the essence of character science. So I'll sum this up in 4 minutes, but it started with a good friend of mine, Dr. Fred Keel, lives down in Lanesboro, Minnesota, owns a beautiful B&B called the Sacred Clay Inn. But also he's got his doctorate, and he studied character science. And for over 7 years, he studied CEOs all around the world and stratified down to what he called the core 4 character habits that distinguished what he called virtuoso leaders. Virtuoso leaders. Now, here's why this mattered. Because this had a dramatic impact on business results. So these high character leaders simply dramatically outperformed the lower quartile leaders, which he called the self-focused, shall we call it the narcissistic leaders. So what he found is being good made them financially great. It created much higher financial returns 26% higher employee engagement. Why? Because top talent doesn't want to work for jerks. And third is lowered corporate risk. So here's all of his research in about 90 seconds. He boiled it down to 4 core character habits. And the outcome of these is trust, which is your world. And here's what he found. The 2 of the head, integrity, which is telling the truth, acting consistently with your principles, standing up for what's right, and keeping promises. It's that do what you say you'll do when you say you will do it. The second is responsibility, taking responsibility for your choices. Now, here's the big one, admitting mistakes and failures. And I think one of the most important new leadership acumens right now in this world of VUCA is the ability to change your mind. As I look at truly wise leaders, one of the characteristics is they've changed their mind a lot because the evidence has changed, the facts have changed, the context have changed. So especially for men, sometimes we want to be more right than accurate because our ego gets in the way. And the third one is responsibility, is just taking accountability to leave the world a better place than you found it. So integrity and responsibility were the 2 habits of the heart, habits of the head, the 2 habits of the heart. Forgiveness. Now, this is an interesting one because usually you don't hear forgiveness talked about in a business context. But number 1, it's letting go of your own mistakes. All right. That's the key, is forgiveness of self. So you just don't become an accumulation of regrets. Number 2, letting go of other people's mistakes. However, and here's this however, wise leadership isn't being soft, isn't about being nice. You forgive people when you see that they have acknowledged the mistake and have learned from it. So it's not about being nice. It's about being accurate. Does that make sense, David?
It does. One, this is part of why we're on here. This aligns so well. As you know, one of the pillars of trust is character. And I love your work that you're doing on this. But on that last point, I could see someone, if I agree that great leadership doesn't always appear nice.
Right.
But I also wonder about being, carrying something like, there are many people that will not ask for forgiveness, as you said, and move in the right direction. And so are you saying carry that then until they do? Because
no, coach them about the relationship that you have as their leader, as their coach, is to let them know this is part of, shall we say, the rules of engagement as we work together. Is we're all going to make mistakes. In fact, if you're not making mistakes, you're not pushing hard enough. But the key is, are you learning? Are you admitting? And are you demonstrating it? That's the key. Then both sides win. So no, part of it is that clarity of leadership that needs to be brought to this discussion. And then the fourth one, now here's interesting. This fourth one had the highest financial return, and it's compassion. With it, which is not just empathizing with others, but also asking for help when you need it, truly caring about others as people, not as job titles, and being deeply committed to other people's personal development. Now, why is this tied to financial outcomes? What we found is that in business, it's found that generally we bring about 2/3 of our mental energy to the workplace. There's kind of this third that's kind of locked behind the curtain, shall we say. But what's found is when we get treated like real people, it taps into this untapped third, this reservoir. So in many ways, it's kind of like creating headcount without adding more people, because you're tapping more into this reservoir that already exists, that just hasn't been leveraged, if that makes sense. So there you go. Integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion. Now, this was all built on work that was done in the early 1990s in a book called The Human Universals, where they looked at what were the universal values that cut across all cultures, and what are the things that parents taught their children cross-culture, cross-history. And then from there, boiling it down to 67 character habits, and then stratifying down to these core 4. Now, to sum this up, what I'm going to be doing now with my partner, James Robertson, who's the president of our company, is we're doing research to bring this into the world of professional sales. Because what I'm interested in is, what are these core habits for professional selling that correlate to financial outcome, to customer commitment, and to engagement? And the fun part is we don't know yet. So we're in the midst of that right now. But just to sum this up, think of it as the character score for the credit score for your character. How's that? And just like having a higher credit score financially, it brings you rewards. And having a higher credit score for your character brings you rewards. Why? Because the outcome of these is your world of trust and the speed of trust. So I think that's the docking station between what I'm up to and what you're up to, if that makes sense.
Hey, it's Ann with the Trust Edge team here. As you know, we are passionate about helping you and your team perform at your best. And that's why David wrote his new book, Trusted Leader. This true-to-life parable follows the story of a CEO who uncovers the root issue threatening his organization's success. And in the back half of the book, David provides a roadmap for even how to solve those root issues. Get Trusted Leader for your team, your organization, or even just for yourself at trustedleaderbook.com.
It's interesting. It aligns so perfectly. Even compassion as a word is one of the 8 pillars of trust, which all these things fit together so beautifully, which when it's true, real research, it tends to do, because truth tends to be truth, right? So, but I think there was something else you said back on number 3, forgiveness. We had one of our last studies, we found 92% of people would trust their senior leader more if they were more transparent about their mistakes. Some people say just transparent. It's not transparent about how cool they are, how amazing they are, how many awards they have. It's this ability to be transparent about your mistakes as a leader is so significant, and to be able to ask forgiveness and show humility and all these things, especially in the new world.
Yeah, it's really leading. If I look at my deep friendships and relationships, it's really based on our vulnerabilities. It's friends where we've shared our struggles, our failures, our flaws. That's what creates deep relationship and deep impact. After traveling for over 9 million miles in the air, which is, by the way, a true number, which is pretty scary when you think about it. After 78 countries, David, I've found that there's only 2 types of people in the world. People who are struggling with something and people who are faking like they're not struggling with something. Everybody on the planet is struggling with something always. Not 99%, 100. And we just need to remember that, because number 1, it'll remind us we're not alone. And number 2 is never forget everybody that's around you has something that they're carrying, some burden. It's part of the human experience. You just don't get through without it.
So what's next for this? So then the next thing for the character work, I agree with you completely. The next thing for the character work is figuring out the impact on sales and sales transformation, because that's been your world, really, sales transformation.
Exactly. And again, it's just the way you occupy your space, because I've always been averse, David, to this whole thing in the world of training and development of technique-based. Because what I found in life is you can't just become an accumulation of techniques. I can't remember like 19 things, okay? So all this is doing is becoming more of who you are, but being yourself, but I would say being your structured self. Because a big thing I see distinguishing people, especially in this confusing world, is people who have structured thinking, who are bringing a framework of thought to their life and to their business.
Let's talk about that, because you and I have talked about this a lot. I often talk about even decision-making gets so much quicker if we you have a framework for making decisions. Our choices get quicker. We get more congruent. We lead people through an exercise that hopefully becomes them, but it really simplifies decision making. It's this decision making values process. But you and I were talking at lunch, and we've known this about you for a long time, but about your kind of design themes process, which is one way of making decisions even as a family. And you were talking about you kind of change your design theme as a family or as husband and wife every 5 years or so. Tell us about that, because that's a framework that really reflects who we really are or aspire to be, but it simplifies the complex.
So leadership, I think, going forward is about being a sense maker, making sense of complexity, bringing clarity to complexity. But you can't give away what you don't have. So you don't have clarity about yourself. How can you be a leader for others? So based on all of the mistakes I've made in my life, here are some thoughts. Design theme number 1 is don't try to figure out the rest of your life. Just think in 3 to 5 year segments. As David Brooks says, just chapterize your life and look at it in bite-sized pieces. Why? Because what you care about over time changes. Back in my 30s and 40s was the period of acquisition. It was about more and aspiration. There's nothing wrong with that. Now I'm in a period about simplicity and lessness. And okay, I didn't realize how things changed. So number 1, life in 5-year pieces. Number 2, as a leader, there's kind of 3 design themes that I see going forward that are going to help make sense of things. Number 1 is to seek clarity over certainty. To seek clarity over certainty. And a corollary here is to seek clarity over agreement. And often a business will sit down and start a meeting and say, okay, let's talk about this, make sure we agree on it. Maybe the different way to say it is, let's discuss this and make sure we're seeing things clearly. Because often we can agree on something that's not true, because we can collude, if that makes sense. So clarity over certainty, and also as part of this, be a thinker, not a knower. Be careful of people who claim like they know all the answers right now. In fact, if they do, run quickly. Spend time with thinkers, not knowers, is number 2. And be a thinker and worry less about knowing and being right. And third is be a listener, not a solver. Because one of the keys to being a strategic thinker and a strategic leader is listening longer and suspending solving. Especially us men tend to be solvaholics because we're so worried about impressing each other. I can't wait to solve this to show you how brilliant I am. But true, wise, mature leadership says, I want to listen longer, listen more deeply, so I can understand more deeply. That's hard. It's easy to say, and it's hard to do. Ask my wife when she says, don't just listen to me, don't fix me. Okay. So I'm not saying I have these right. I'm just saying I'm working on it. But these 3 themes, do those make sense to you, David?
Absolutely. Absolutely. How does that look? Seeking clarity. Let's go back to that. All of these make sense, but how does that seeking clarity over certainty when there is such uncertainty?
So I don't have the whole answer, but I have learned this. When you're making big decisions, it's often the worst time to think about the decision. So one of the things kind of intuitively my wife and I have done is just establish some kind of themes of how we want to think about our life in 5-year chapters. Okay. And so I think I shared with you some of the themes that we look at right now are number 1, peace of mind. Why? When you lose peace of mind, nothing else matters. It just is. You carry the weather inside of your mind, and when your mind is troubled, it's bad weather. Peace of mind. Number 2, simplicity. I've just looked back on my life and found that if we keep life simple, we are generally much happier. And when life got too complex, by the way, even if it's good things, by the way, it caused me great anxiety, and I struggle with anxiety. Complexity equal to anxiety. So number 2 is simplicity. 3 is freedom. This is a big one for us. Back to my love of travel and other things, we want to have freedom to gain more experiences. So we're very careful about anything that will tie us down, because at this point in our life, we still have many experiences that we want to consume. The 4th one is relational frugality. To have fewer and deeper relationships. And to be very honest, going deeper with deep friends. I'm really not that interested necessarily in new friends. I'm interested, like you and I get together for lunch a month ago and going back over 30 years together. That brings me joy. And relational frugality is surrounding yourself with nutritious relationships, not for narcissistic reasons. Why? So you have energy to give away to other people, which leads to the 5th design theme, self-donation. The greatest thing that you can give away is yourself. And one of the things that brings me great joy and energy right now, and frankly, during COVID, this has really been a healing force, is mentoring. Just mentoring like 5 or 6 people younger than me on Zoom or whatever. I don't have to have all the answers. They just want to know they're not alone. And so anybody who's listening to this podcast at any age, I would just passionately say to you, I don't care if you're 30 years old. There's some 20-something that needs your attention. Spend time and give it away. So I bring those up, David, because once you're clear on your decision and design themes, now when a big decision arises, you can say, okay, here's the decision. Here's my design themes. How does it compare and contrast?
So let's take one. We talked about this. You thought, let's get a puppy, your wife says, right? And you said someday we might get a puppy, or you talked about it, but...
So my wife loves Newfoundlands. And by the way, so do I. I think they're absolutely gorgeous animals. And so, wherever you go, there's dogs these days. And we saw these Newfie puppies, and they were just absolutely adorable. So of course, it's the whole thing kicks in. Oh, we're at home. Let's get a puppy. Yeah, totally get it. But then we went back to, what does that do to freedom? Does that add more complexity to our life? Maybe. What does that then do to our peace of mind? Do you see where we're going here? And so it doesn't. So we said, no question, dog, but just later in life. But here's the key. When you create your design principles, then you're not making decisions based on feelings. One of the most dangerous things you can do is make a decision based entirely on feelings, because feelings, oh man, they're dangerous because they can change so quickly. So the criteria before the decision, not perfect, but it's helped me because I don't get swept up there in just feelings-based decision-making.
Very much. That impacted me a whole lot. I love it. So these kind of frameworks can guide us. They can make us more congruent, living out what we actually believe instead of kind of making a quick decision. I remember a CEO we'd worked with, and she was kind of all over the place, and she came up with these 5 decision-making values, and people said, we don't just like her, we trust her now. And that's kind of when you have this framework, you just, okay, I'm not just going to make it on a whim. This is how I make my decisions. This way, everybody knows it. Frankly, whether you agree or not perfectly with those 5 things or not, you trust them because they're making it by a framework, not on a whim. So,
and I would call it just create a personal taxonomy of how you think about things. And because messy thinking, there's an epidemic of messy thinking. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
In life and business.
So you know, I've known you to be a mentor of others, a lot of times younger leaders, at one point college students, and certainly even just advising senior leaders, presidents of countries and companies. So, but one thing we talked about earlier as far as the next generation, and really anybody, I think, was how do you know truth today? How do you help them see truth? How do you help them know what trust is? I actually remember a piece of research that I looked at. The number one question high schoolers are asking, and this was actually a decade ago. The number one question they were asking was, what's actually real?
Yeah. And that's yeah. And
so how do we help? How do we define it? You've got groupthink all over the place. We had very close friends over to our home last night talking about some different things about, I mean, you can talk about anything. Pandemic people have a view. The masking people have a view. The Afghanistan people have a view. But how do we discern?
Yeah. You are hitting on probably the topic I'm most preoccupied with right now. Because A, I don't know myself, and B, I think it is the core thing. And what did you say the question was? What's real?
Well, that was the question high schoolers were asking. Number one question they were asking was, what is actually real? And in essence, they're saying, what's true? What's real here? Yeah. So I think we have to figure out how are people, especially those of us called to advise, lead, mentor others. There's a massive responsibility to discern and help people see the truth, not just what they want to hear, or not just one side, or not just groupthink. I think you said something about I think you call it the murkiness of truthiness.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So let me give you two answers. One on the business side, and then maybe the other one just on the broader personal life side that I'm messing around with right now. On the business side, we do a great deal of work in healthcare and pharmaceutical. About 2/3 of our business is in that space. And one of the things that I've learned after working in that space for over 2 decades is that the true experts have been schooled and developed under the banner of what's called Bayesian thinking. BAYES, Bayesian thinking. 3 bullet points. Number one, whenever you're looking at a problem or situation, assume you could be wrong. So the first thing is humility-based intellect. Number two, constantly update your assumptions because things change rapidly. Let's take COVID as an example. There's a lot of frustration with healthcare officials because people are saying, well, how come you told us this last April and this now? Well, it's because COVID has morphed and changed and we have new data. So number two is, as they say in healthcare, update your assumptions. And then number three is make and change decisions based on new evidence. In healthcare, they call it snowflakes of evidence that are constantly falling in front of us. And so I think that's structured thinking from healthcare can apply, frankly, in any industry.
Hey, it's Sam from the Trust Edge team. Most training and development initiatives don't last or even solve the root issue hindering your organization. That's where Trust Edge coaching certification comes in. Trust Edge coaches are equipped with a suite of tools to identify, benchmark, and close gaps in trust for good. Because when you solve the real issue, you get measurable results in a culture where people actually want to make an impact. So whether you're a coach with your own clients or a leader training people inside your organization, check out trustedgecoaching.com and see how you can start solving the root issue and get lasting results in your business. And now back to the show.
I think we have the political challenge to this, as you know, is it's called, if you do this, you're called a waffler. Right. You're called you're called out. I think back, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln who said, I hope I'm not the same tomorrow as I am today.
Right.
Tomorrow I hope to be better. And yet you see politicians and leaders get flayed by the press when they make a decision based on new information that was perhaps even unknowable before.
Right. And, given the rate at which the Delta variant is morphing, 5 weeks from now, we're going to know a whole lot more and make a different set of decisions. So I think it gets back to what I said earlier. Wise leaders have the courage to change their mind when faced with new assumptions and new evidence. So that's kind of a business construct that's been helpful to me. Does that make sense, David?
It totally makes sense.
Now, you and I were talking about, in the broader context of life, you used a very important word, discernment. If there's a new spiritual and mental muscle to develop, I think it's discernment. And boy, let me tell you, I don't have this figured out, but here's where I'm so far in the thinking, is maybe number one, before you consume any message from the media, because all media is biased, because all of us are biased. There isn't a non-biased person roaming the planet today. I'm a voracious reader. So every day I read the big 5 newspapers: Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Financial Times, USA Today, and the local newspaper. Why? Because all media is biased, so I want to balance my biases. And then I can make my own informed decisions after I have this kind of panoramic view of perspectives. So I think the first thing I've found is this: before you consume any message coming from anyone in the media or in your personal life, look at the messenger before you consume the message. And look at their life. Look at their character before you consume the message, and ask yourself, is that person attractive? Is their life attractive? I kiddingly say, right now I need to lose about 13 pounds. So if you're looking for fitness advice, I'm not your guy. If you're looking for marriage counseling, Johnny Depp probably isn't the guy to go to. Okay. So what I'm saying is, look at the messenger before you consume their message. Design theme number 2 of discernment. Overlay the rule of self-interest. One of the truths of life is, I like you, but I love myself. Every one of us has self-interest, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's called being human. But look at the self-interest of the message, and that'll help you discern the message and the purpose of it. And then the third one is kind of what I call the visceral test. So pick who you would point to as the greatest leader of all time. For me, it's Jesus of Nazareth. His design thinking changed the world. I believe Jesus was the greatest design thinker in the arc of history. So for me, I'll pick Jesus, but others could pick Buddha, Gandhi, Churchill, Lincoln. There's all kinds of them. Whatever, you pick yours. And once you pick that, take the message and put it in quotation marks, and then put in front of it, and in my case, I'd say, and Jesus said X, whatever that message is, and you'll have a visceral response physically of whether or not that rings true. It's not an intellectual thing. It'll just give you a gut feel of, is there truth in that thing? Make sense, David?
It makes sense.
So that's all I've got so far, but this is the one I'm working on right now, because
somehow, this is, how do we get, all we deal with is trust, trying to build trust, trying to bring people together for good. And this is a massive problem, because there's so many, ahead of time, people come with so many preconceived,
right,
I'll say convictions, right, and they're so blocked from any ability to open up to even see another person.
Exactly.
It kills movement forward.
We all have intellectual and spiritual glaucoma. We look at things through our frame of reference. It's called being human. Recently, I would point people to John Meacham. John is one of my heroes because I think he's just a brilliant, structured, rational thinker. He's got a great podcast called The Fate of Facts. It's not getting into political state. It's just how we got detached from facts. I think it's an important piece, and I'm listening to it intensely as I'm wrestling with this key question. And I'd leave you with one final thought that's been helpful to me. Be careful of affiliation. One of the things I'm doing in my life is affiliating less. I don't mean connecting with people. I want to do that more. But be careful with affiliating with groups, parties, ideologies, because often it's like, I'll use the analogy of, it's like buying a cable package, like the entertainment package from a cable company. You may get a lot of channels you don't want in there. Okay. So what I'm doing as the months and years go by is to be more of an unaffiliated, independent thinker in all parts of my life. Because once you align with a team, an ideology, anything, you kind of take on a lot of things that maybe you didn't want to sign up for. And you create glaucoma.
And here's what I see in you that's been the win of that. You have some people that say be unaffiliated out of ego, out of renegade, out of all this. It's almost like unaffiliated with accountability. Mm-hmm. You have a core group that you are part of. You have others that would say, "Hey, Phil, notice this." Right. But that's almost the light bulb for me is we talk about a lot about accountability, but it's like unaffiliation with healthy accountability.
Exactly. It's the balance. But when you're not affiliated, it's easier to change your mind, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely, of course. Absolutely.
Because you don't have this confirmation bias weighing you down. And I just think that's an important thing, is to navigate the future with this kind of structured independence of thought, if that makes sense. But then again, surround yourself with nutritious and wise people. Because when I'm dealing with tough stuff, you and I've talked about having a personal board of directors. I've got 5 people in my life that I go to when I'm making tough decisions, and I lean on their wisdom and not my own perspective.
Let's jump into one more thing. I have a load of other questions we could ask, but I want to touch on one more thing we've talked about, because, leadership, it's life, it's personal, it's public, it's private, it tends to be great leaders at home or greater leaders at work often. And also, so we think about it more holistically. And one thing you and I talked about last time we were together was, some of this work, I think, inspired a little bit by David Brooks. We both respect and, is a friend of yours and his work on, I think we talked a little bit about the 4 convictions, but what do we want the rest of our life to look like? What do you want the rest of your life to look like? And how do you help others think that way?
Well, I'll use David's construct because, quite frankly, during COVID, one of the questions we all should be asking in this great sabbatical that we were given, how do we want to live the rest of our life? Which leads to the next question is, what does a life well lived look like? What is the good life? What is the definition of that? And as far as I can find, the best description, and I've actually got it written on my board here from David Brooks, The Second Mountain. If you haven't read David Brooks' book, The Second Mountain, read it. The first is the mountain of success. It's about building ego, self, and wealth. It's about acquisition. The second mountain is about significance. It's about shedding the ego. It's not about you, and it's about contribution. And so what he's saying is, how do you become a second mountain person? But his wisdom says, because I've seen this in life, as we're climbing that first mountain of success, often we get knocked off the mountain, or we get to the top and we go, this is it. And then we're knocked into, now listen to his language, we're knocked into the valley of bewilderment. I love that. The valley of bewilderment. And he said, some people break down, but others break open. And when you get broken open, you figure out what matters. And so this is getting to the answer of what I think the good life looks like. And it's not my definition, it's his. It has 4, as he calls it, 4 core convictions. The first is faith. And I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about faith. Believing in something bigger than yourself. Shrinking down to your actual size, because often, especially men in our younger years, we can be very overinflated. So it's having a sane view of self and believing in something larger than yourself. Number 2 is marriage or being deeply committed. And marriage is important. I love Dr. Jordan Peterson has a great definition of marriage. It's being locked in a cell together with somebody that you want to have a 50-year conversation with. Doesn't sound terribly sexy or romantic, but what he's saying is it's being locked in a jail cell of commitment and conviction to each other. Because what he said as a clinical psychologist, if we have a side door, we'll use it. Okay, we will use it because marriage is really hard work. And again, David Brooks talks about true love and committed love. The kind that I've been blessed with by being married to my best friend for over 40 years. And this is his words. True love is what remains after being in love is burned away. Okay? That's what he's talking about when it comes to the commitment of marriage, and it matters deeply. Third is community. And he talks about the 3 rings of community. The first is your inner ring, friends and family. And remember, we talked about relational frugality. And I also think a big part of this inner ring is to love your family as much as you do your best friends. I mean, it sounds kind of goofy, but sometimes that's one of the challenges of the inner ring. The middle ring are your community linkages. It's the school boards, it's the city boards, it's those kind of things. And I think that's the part that's corroding in our society right now, is the loss of that inner ring. And the outer ring now is that whole social media sphere. And I think what's going on is we're corroding from the outside, not the inside right now, and that concerns me. But third is, do you have a strong sense of community? And this is why I'm so obsessed about deep relationships, not shallow ones. And the fourth conviction, vocation. Finding the work that deeply matters. I've been blessed to stumble into something that I feel called to. So I'm never really working. This is just what I do. Same with you, David. I don't see you working. This is just David. And you've just found your calling and wrapped around it. Okay. And, you know, there's that simple chart when I speak to young people in college, I say, well, how do you know what your calling is? There's 4 questions. What are you really good at? What are your signature strengths? Number 1. Number 2, does the world need it, whatever you have? 3 is it something you love to do? Because you can be good at it, but doesn't mean you like doing it. And 4th is, will the world pay for it? Because as my dad used to say, the best way to help the poor is not become one. Okay. So you got to do something the world will pay for. I think that is the best definition I've encountered. Faith, marriage, community, and vocation, to me, are the 4 cornerstones of a life well lived.
There's a whole lot of wisdom here. I don't think we should jump off on anything else today. I think we should have another conversation.
Let's do it.
So this is fantastic. And I've got so many notes here that I'm thinking about, tied to our trust work, tied to our friendship. There's always new wisdom that comes out of your mouth because you're continually learning and reading. If people want to know more about Phil Styrlund, what's in stumbling? Stumbling together. If people want to know more about you and Summit Group and your book, what you're doing.
Summitvalue.com. The book is called Relevance, Mattering More, and it's ps@summitvalue.com. Reach out to me. Let's be confused together about the big stuff. And David, I want to leave you with something. We have a common friend, Jack Fortin. I think you know Jack, don't you, from the Bethel days? When Jack and I got together, we'd get together for a beer and a burger every so often and talk about all this stuff. He left me with a piece that had impacted him. And I just want to leave with you and your audience, because I think it puts a bow on a lot of things that we talked about today. So again, I don't know where he got this, but it really resonated with me. So let's close with this. Finding yourself isn't how it really works. You're not a $10 bill in last year's winter coat. By the way, you're also not lost. Your true self is standing right there, buried beneath all the cultural conditioning, other people's opinions, and inaccurate beliefs that you came up with as a kid that you now believe in as an adult. So really, finding yourself is actually returning to yourself. It's an unlearning. It's an excavation. It's going back to remember who you were before the world got its hands on you. And that's one of the few things I know for sure is that makes sense. It's an unlearning. It's an excavation. It's not a bucket of techniques. Thank you, David. I hope this has been fun and helpful.
Phil, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been the Trusted Leader Show. Until next time, stay trusted.